gods of the sun who died, was resurrected. Most had a mother who was a virgin, had 12 followers. Then we have both Jesus and Buddha, both doing the same thing. The religions of this world are designed purposely to distract your mind and to give you something to hope for. I believe that religion is at the bottom of all of the world's problems, because the people who are in power have given us our governments, our legislatures, our laws, our institutions of higher learning. They've also given us our governmental systems, and they've given us all our religions. Religions come from the same people who have given you your banking system, your governmental systems, so that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are nothing more than Masonic concoctions to entertain the masses, to entertain the people and keep them occupied. And this is, of course, what George Carlin was talking about when he said it's a big club and you ain't in it. Because the religions of this world are designed purposely to distract your mind and to give you something to hope for. While the people who came up with these ideas in England know what they're doing. They are subverting the human race. What we're seeing today is the human family on the earth is being mutated. The reason why we have major wars in the world, all kinds of people have all kinds of ideas about why we have different wars and what all of these wars are all about. Wars are for one reason only, and that is to guide the human race. To guide the human race into a particular realm of thinking. Because if you have peace around the earth, everybody would get together and do things together, but that's not what the masters who own us, who think that they own us, want. So they create wars, which then feeds violence. It feeds pornography, it feeds all kinds of debasement in the human being, and therefore they're dropping down and mutating the human family and rebuilding us through video games and through television, propaganda, etc. So it's a very, very serious thing which is now facing the earth. And most of the people in the world today have no idea in the world what's going on and how this stuff really works. I was fascinated to learn how government works. One of the nice things about my life is that I've been able to meet a lot of very interesting people. And when I discovered how government really works, I was amazed at how commerce, government, religion, all work together, and everything is well planned out. And so until and unless the people of America, we are a doomed species, because we're being fed propaganda and lies and mistruths, and it's very frightening because I know where we're being led. So I wanted to talk tonight about religion and government. And Moses was the great lawgiver, we're told. When you find out that, and it won't take very long if you start doing some research on your own, you'll find out that Christianity and Judaism and Islam, the three of those three religions are referred to as the people of the book, because all three rely on a book for their religious teachings. The Quran, the Bible, and the New Testament. I believe the New Testament is a metaphor, and I'm going to give some lectures on that later. But Judaism today is actually Hinduism. It's connected through the ancient Hindus, many of their teachings called Brahmanism. And you put an A in front of Brahma, it becomes Abraham or Abraham. And so this whole religious thing about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all of this stuff is Hinduism. And when you find out how the old ancient Phoenician Canaanites were the bankers, the politicians in the Middle East, they picked up on the old Hindu stuff, and a lot of the teachings coming out of Egypt, and fashioned a new religion called Judaism. And out of Judaism comes Christianity. So much of Christianity and Judaism is based on the Old Testament and Moses in particular. Moses and Abraham were two very big names in the old Jewish tradition. And so when you begin to look at the history of the scriptures and the history of the Old and New Testament, you will begin to see for the first time that the stories in the Old Testament have been misrepresented. And two of the most famous archaeologists in all of Israel today, the top two archaeologists in Israel today, have written a book called Unearthing the Bible. And in it, they said that none of the stories in the Old Testament are actual historical facts. And that, in fact, in point of fact, there was no ancient Israel. There was no ancient Israel. So all of this talk about the ancient people of Israel, there was no ancient Israel. It didn't exist. There were Canaanites. And in the Bible, we hear about the Canaanites, but the Canaanites were the people that we today call the Hebrew people. So Canaanite religion is today referred to as Judaism, yes. Okay, Moses is the basis for the law. America is a land of laws. We are a nation ruled by law. Well, in point of fact, that's not true. America is not a nation of laws. America is probably the most lawless nation on the earth. America's laws are decided each day by those who are in power. And whatever they say the law is today, that's what the law is. And if they say it's different tomorrow, that's what the law is. So there is no law in America. America is a lawless nation. And we are heading into a lawless time in the world where only violence and revolution and bloodshed is going to settle anything because there are no laws. But I think it's interesting for both Jews, Christians, and Islam to realize something about Moses and the law. So, he's the lawgiver. And we're told that he was given the law from God. He comes down from the mountain. Incidentally, Moses throws the law down and breaks it, so he was the first lawbreaker. And the Ten Commandments that we supposedly were on those tablets, the Ten Commandments were copied from something in Egypt called the 12 Negative Confessions. Called 12 Negative Confessions. You can look it up in any encyclopedia on Egyptology, on Egypt, and you will see that the 12 Negative Confessions were transposed and became known as the Ten Commandments. So the very Ten Commandments were Egyptian. That's just some scriptures showing the connection between the ancient book of the dead of Egypt and the Exodus. And here's Moses with the Ten Commandments. Moses the lawgiver. Now, even in the government, even in the U.S. government, there are statues of Moses in the halls of justice, and even in the House of Representatives in America, you have Moses. I think it's interesting that this picture of Moses has the Roman wreath, because America's government is Roman. The three cornerstones, or the three legs on which America exists, is first of all Roman in government, Greek in philosophy, and Jewish in law. So Jewish law with Greek philosophy and Roman governmental system is the way America operates. Rome, Greece, and the Jewish law. But why does Moses have horns? Most people have never noticed that in almost all the carvings, Moses has horns. Yeah. Moses is pictured with horns because the horns are representing the moon. Moses was the focal figure of an ancient cult of moon worship on the Sinai Peninsula. The horns represent the crescent moon. So when we see the horns are actually the moon in the lower quarter. Here is the moon god. In Sinai, well, I guess I'm going to show that anyway, so I'll wait. You'll see the horns of the moon. In Rome, Native American, Indian chiefs wore horns. The Vikings, Native Americans and the Vikings wore horns because the Native Americans always counted their days from sundown to sundown. So you would hear the American Indians talk about many moons have passed. They didn't keep track of the day by the sun because that was Christian sun worship. So the Native Americans, like the Vikings, were moon worshipers. So they counted their day from sundown to sundown, just as the Jews do today, from sundown to sundown, because that's when the moon comes out. So the horns were the horns of the lunar horns of the moon. And a lot of the old coins and carvings in the ancient world show the hands raised as they were worshiping the moon god. In Egypt, and of course in Islam, Islamic religion is a very interesting combination of moon worship and Saturn worship and Venus worship. Venus is very big in the Islamic religion. Here it is in the Vatican. You'll see the crescent moon. So the moon cult. And I was just showing that if you go to Google and put in moon god Sin, because the name of the moon god in Arabia was, his name was called Sin. And so if you look up the word Sin or Allah, it will tell you that Allah in Islam is actually the moon god Sin, S-I-N. And Ai in the ancient language was a mountain. So Sin Ai is the god of the moon god, comes up over the mountain. So put it together, it becomes Sinai, Sin Ai. Even in the Catholic Church, they have the crescent moon. Now, the moon god, as I said, was named Sin. And it shows here that this is just from an encyclopedia. Sin, the moon god, was chiefly venerated in pre-Christian civilization in southern Arabia. If Moses climbed Mount Sinai to meet the resident God, then the God he met there would have been the moon god Sin, who had been enthroned on that mountain since the rise of Samaria. Sin gave his name to the whole Sinai Peninsula. So the moon god's name was Sin. And moon worship has been big all over the Middle East. And you'll see moon god virtually everywhere in the Middle East. And then we get to this article points out that the original Yahweh was only another form of this primitive lunar deity of Arabia. So Yahweh of the Hebrew religion was actually Sin Ai. And this is why, even in Israel today, they do not spell synagogue S-Y-N. In Israel, they spell it S-I-N, because synagogue was the house of worship of the god Sin. Synagogue. And here in Israel, you'll see another synagogue and blow it up, and it's S-I-N. So synagogue comes from the early worship of the moon god Sin. Just showing how, in Jewish literature everywhere, it talks about the moon, many moons, the Jewish cycle of the moon. And so the point I'm making here is it's very important to realize that Moses represented a moon cult. And this is just the first part of, and you'll see here on the Sinai Peninsula, Mount Sinai, and it's across from Egypt, and that's where the great mountain range was in the middle of Sinai. And at night, when the moon would come up in the east, there was a mountain range there, and the moon god's name was Sin, and the mountain was Ai. Put it together, it becomes Mount Sinai. It was called the Mountain of Moses, or the Wilderness of Sin. So Sinai was the worship of, and I'm just showing, if you go to Google, they've got Moses and moon worship, got thousands and thousands of articles about this subject. So it's up to anybody just to do your own research. Now, Moses was also connected to a volcano cult also. So you got the moon, and now you have volcanoes. Volcano worship was very big in the ancient world. It says volcanoes, like any other impressive or fearful aspect of nature, volcanoes have been the object of worship for human beings from the earliest Stone Age. And yet, original Yahweh seems to have begun as a volcano god also. Mount Sinai, where Moses encountered him, was the seat of the Midianite god who had formerly dwelt in a volcano. So this is why in all the drawings and pictures in the Jewish religion, you will always see Moses encountering Yahweh at the volcano. Because the ancient Canaanites, Phoenicians and Canaanites, the people of the Middle East, also worshiped the god of the volcano. Even books put out on the subject of Mount Sinai show it in burning in flames, mountain of fire.
As you turn, it keeps coming in and out. I don't know if that'll help. Let's see.
We'll try it. Anyway, and so here we have Moses. Now, these pictures are taken from Jewish publications for children in the synagogue. You'll see Moses here. Does that look like a volcano to you? Yeah. Here's another one, Mount Sinai. Jehovah performs signs for the Israelites. That looks like a volcano. There's the children of Israel. That's another thing that's always interested me. How in Israel we have the children of Israel, but you have kids, which are baby goats. Here's another picture of the volcano with the Israelites. So, and you know, it's everywhere. All you have to do is look at any of the publications of the Jewish religion, and you will see volcanoes, moon worship. Here's one Israelite telling the other one, no, that's a volcano, airhead. See? Yeah. Here's Moses up in the volcano. Here it says, one day the mountain rumbled and it spewed out fire and smoke. The mountain was engulfed in a dense cloud. God called out of the cloud. There's the Israelites running from Mount Sinai. Looks like a volcano. And here's a mountain named Sinai, and does that look like a volcano? Now here in the Encyclopedia Judicum, there was a page showing some of the symbols for the different feast days. And the feast day at the bottom was the feast of the giving of the law. This is from the Encyclopedia Judicum. Here's the feast day of the giving of the law. Does that look like a volcano to you? Yeah. Because the Jews were worshipers of a volcano god, worshipers of a moon god. They were worshipers of the planet Saturn. Saturn was called Lord of the Rings because Saturn was God of the Rings. And they're still making movies in Hollywood today, Lord of the Rings. And most people going to movies have no idea in the world that Lord of the Rings is the planet Saturn, and Saturn was the god of the Hebrews, or another name for Saturn was Yahweh. Yahweh, or Yahweh, Jehovah, Saturn, Lord of the Rings. This is why women were told to listen to their God, so they would wear an ear ring. Men were to get married before their God, so they wear a wedding ring, because the rings represent the planet Saturn. We can get into all of that when I get into courts and government later. So there it is, the feast of the giving of the law to Moses, a volcano. The volcano comes from, the word volcano comes from the Latin volcano god Vulcan, or Volcanus, derived from the old Cretan deity Volcanus. My dear friend here, Abin Ray, was going to do the reading, but as long as I feel, you know, as long as I got the energy, I'll do it then. So here's Volcanus, spirit. And in the Bible, in the book of Exodus, it says that the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud and led them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light to go by. So he took not away the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. So we're told in the old Hebrew scriptures that God appeared to the old ancient Israelites as a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of cloud by day, so that they would know Jehovah that was there with them. Well, that's what you get with a volcano, is a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. So these are just quotes from reference works, encyclopedias about, and I won't, since we have so much more I got to cram in there, we won't go through all these scriptures. But the bottom line is that there's just an awful lot of documentation, books that you can go to check all of this out. It's everywhere. But most people don't do this kind of tedious research, spending months and months in UCLA libraries and USC and Berkeley and, for weeks on end, day in and day out, for 48 years. Most people, got more important things to do. Thank you. So, yeah, I would spend days and days and days, sometimes weeks on end, just on one subject at UCLA. And, they have like a 7-story library above ground and 3 stories below. I'd spend weeks and weeks just photocopying documents, talking to rabbis. I used to go down to the Simon Wiesenthal Center for Holocaust Studies and sit there for hours and talk with the rabbis. And one of my dearest friends was Rabbi Marvin Antelman from Newton, Massachusetts. Rabbi Martin Antelman was a very, very kind and loving man. He was a very dear man, a very dear friend. And at the time, he was a president of something called the American Rabbinical Association. So he was a very highly placed rabbi. And this is back in the early 60s. And Rabbi Antelman and I used to sit and talk about religion, philosophy, governments, war, and the whole state, which we call Israel. You'd be surprised at the stuff that the rabbis actually know they're not telling you. I asked Rabbi Antelman one time, I said, Rabbi, tell me the truth. Was there, in fact, in point of fact, Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, or Moses, or King David, or any of those people, did those people actually really exist? And his response was something to the order of, look at, everybody has a religion. Catholics got a religion. Muslims got a religion. Buddhists got a religion. We got to have something too. So we got a religion. And so I said, yeah, but were these people real? And so he said, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is actually Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. From Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, you got Osiris, Isis, Horus, or Father, Son, Holy Ghost. There was always must be a triune God. It's always three gods in one. So therefore, the Jews can't have anything to do with Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, so they have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which gives us Judaism. No, there's just 3 names of 3 divine principles. So the whole thing is based on the triune gods. Here's a list of 37 sun gods, gods of the sun, who died, was resurrected. Most had a mother who was a virgin, had 12 followers. 37 different religions have sun gods and gods who died on a cross. Let's take a look at some of these sun gods, or shall we say sons, S-U-N, of God. Ancient sun gods with the radiating of the sun. Here's a radiating sun god, old petroglyph stone. Here's a petroglyph sun man. Keeping in mind, these paintings and carvings are thousands of years before Christianity. Here's a Mesopotamian worship of the sun god. Zoroastrian sun. Ancient sun gods always had the spokes of the sun radiating from their head, which we said before as the crown of thorns. Let's start with the ancient Hindu sun of God. Here's a son of God, S-U-N. Another sun god. You'll see the sun behind the god's head, showing that it's actually a spiritual, it's a manifestation of the sun in a god. The sun is always God. Everywhere you see gods of the ancient world, they always represented the sun. It was called, quite simply, sun worship. Pre-Christian sun worship in Eastern and Southern Slavic areas of the world, Eastern Europe, Chinese. Here's the sun god appearing to one of his followers. The ancient Egyptians had sun gods. Here's Horus, the falcon, wearing the sun disk. The ancient Greeks and Romans had sun gods also. In Greek, Jesus is sun and Helios is the sun. Here in the Jewish synagogue, we have Helios, the sun god, on the floor in a Jewish synagogue. Here's Helios, or Apollo, or Sol, the sun god, riding across heaven. So basically what I'm saying is that the ancient world represented the sun in its personification and made the sun into a person to be worshipped. And that person became a god. And so here we see the sun with the sun rays, with the horses pulling the sun across the sky because they believed the sun roamed across the sky with horses. That's the only way they knew how to transport anything was on horses. So they said horses pulled the sun across the sky. Here in the Vatican, you will see Helios, the sun god, in the Vatican. Here's a Roman sun god, Mithra. Again, you'll see the crown of thorns. Crown of thorns was nothing more than the sun rays. The pagan sun god, Mithra, also known as the invincible sun, because the sun always comes back from winter. It dies in the winter, but it always comes back to us. And it's only supposed to come back because he said he would return. Well, he does. Every year in the spring, God's sun, who was dead in the winter, as far as we're concerned, in the northern hemisphere, the sun was dead in winter. But he springs back to life in spring. So he's our risen Savior. Of course, the sun is your risen Savior. If it doesn't rise, we're dead. So these are all pictures of ancient sun gods. Mithra, the sun god. The old Mesoamerican sun gods, also in Central and South America, they had sun gods. Aztec and Mayas, which we saw in the first video. You'll see the sun on the altar. Here's sun worship in Peru. Universal worship of the sun god, of the solar deity, crawling on the knees to the sun. Here's another picture in South America of the ancient South American tribes worshiping the sun on the altar. Sun gods were everywhere. Nothing new. Quetzalcoatl, sun god. The Native Americans had sun gods too. The sun god's children. Native Americans were called the sun god's children. They had their own sun gods, as you can see. Orientals, they had sun gods too. Here in Korea, they got their sun god who came from heaven. He's just dressed like all the rest of them. In China, the solar deity. Japan, solar worship, the sun. The Mormons have a sun god too. The Mormons always had the sun. Sun's everywhere in the Mormon church. Political sons, of course, they always have political sons of God too, sun gods. Japan's emperors worship the sun, and the dictator, the murderous dictator who killed more human beings on the earth than anyone in the history of the world, Mao Zedong, killed more human beings, more millions, than anyone else on the earth. and he is a sun god. The Buddhists also have sun gods. Buddha was also a sun god. As a matter of fact, all through Buddhism, all their gods will always be sun gods. Then we have both Jesus and Buddha, both doing the same thing. On the left, you see Buddha coming to help a poor, sick person. Buddha comes in to look after a poor, sick person. And here on the other right-hand side, you'll see Jesus comes as a sun god to help a sick person. So it's the same idea. Jesus is God's Son, S-U-N, Son God. Now let's look at Jesus as the Son of God. There's a very important book called Jesus Christ, Son of God. You need to get the book. You can order it from anywhere. You can order it from bookstores. Jesus Christ, Son of God. Ancient Cosmology and Early Christian Symbolism. So, what we're saying is that Jesus is a metaphor. The word Jesus, the person of Jesus, we're actually talking about the Son. That's why he's called God's Son, the light of the world. And Jerusalem, where Jesus was supposedly born or died, one of the two, you'll see it's the sun symbol. Always Jesus is referred to and shown to be a sun god. All churches always picture Jesus everywhere and every time in every church, always a sun god. So, the idea being very simple. Here we have Jesus again, the sun god. The crown of thorns is, of course, the sun rays. The old petroglyph cross behind his head. Jesus is the sun. We have quite literally thousands of pictures from magazines, periodicals, Christian magazines. In the Christian Bible story of Jesus, something very interesting is said by Jesus. He wanted to gather his people under his wings. There's a scripture that says that. In Luke 13:34 in the New Testament, in Luke 13:34 says, this is Jesus speaking. And Jesus says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, your people have killed the prophets and have stoned the messengers that were sent to you. I have often wanted to gather your people as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you wouldn't let me. The New Century Version of the Bible says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you killed the prophets and stoned to death those who were sent to you. Many times I wanted to gather your people as a hen gathers her chick under her wings. The reason he said this is because in the Bible, Old Testament, the Messiah was understood to be the Son with wings. Here in the Old Testament book of Malachi 4:2, says this, but for you who fear my name, the Son, S-U-N, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. It's in the book of Malachi 4:2 that the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. Here's the New Living Translation. But for you who fear the name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. Healing in his wings, Son. Well, where did we get that idea of the sun with wings? Where did it come from? It came from the ancient very ancient world where the ancients always pictured the sun having wings. The ancient Egyptians had suns with wings. In Egypt, the sun had wings. So the sun among the stars, well, of course the sun is among the stars. So we see a picture of the sun in the heavens among the stars. This is why we picture Jesus hanging on the cross, because he represents the sun among the stars. Jesus is God's son. The rays of the Egyptian sun of God was copied by the Christians. On the right-hand side, you will see the pharaohs offering up an offering to the sun as the sun reaches down with his rays to bring light and warmth to the world. On the left-hand side, you will see in the Christian artwork, God's Son, Jesus, the Son, is also reaching down with rays, the same as the Egyptian Christianity copied. On the left-hand side again, you will see the Pharaoh with the sun reaching down with his rays. On the right, you will see the Middle Ages in the church. At the top, you'll see the sun reaching down and touching all of the apostles, just as the sun in Egypt. It's all sun worship. Here you'll see another example. And another. The Pharaoh with the sun rays, and Christians with the rays of the sun hitting them, God's Son and his rays. It's everywhere in Christianity, the same concept. So, that's where we get so many of our teachings from in Christianity, as from Egyptian sun worship. Some early Christians were following a different sun god instead of Jesus. His name was Apollo. 1 Corinthians 1:12 in the New Testament Bible, in the book of Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 1:12 says this. The Apostle Paul said that they have said that some of you claim to follow me. The Apostle Paul was writing this. And he said, they have said some of you claim to follow me, Paul, while others claim to follow Apollos, or Peter, or even Christ. 1 Corinthians 1, so this is what I mean. One of you says, I follow Paul. Another says, I follow Apollos. Another says, I follow Peter. And another says, I follow Christ. Who is this Apollos? I know who Peter was, and who Christ was, and who the Apostle Paul was. But it says, I follow Apollos. Well, Apollos is another. This is in the New International Reader's Version. Another says, I follow Apollos. Well, Apollos was, 1 Corinthians 3:4, Apollos was a sun god. You see, he's holding the sunflower. Apollos was a sun god. Others claim to follow Apollos. So it's saying that in the early Christian congregation, there were some who were following Apollos, the sun god. Here in the church is Apollo, the sun god, on one facet of the pagan trinity, in the Cathedral of St. Peter and St. Mary in Cologne, Germany. So in the modern day churches, you will see the sun gods in the churches. There's Apollo, God's son, the light of the world. Now, we all know that Jesus is said to have died crucified on a cross. However, there were other saviors and messiahs who also died on a cross. We have Jesus dying on the cross. As I said to you before, we have 37 different messiahs who died. 37 different sons of God who died. There was actually World 16 Crucified Saviors by Kersey Graves. Interesting book, showing that there were like 15 different major religions of the world had messiahs who died on a cross before Christianity. So let's start with the crucified Krishna of ancient India. This is where we get the word Christ. Basically, it comes from the same concept of Krishna, or Christ. Christ and Krishna. We're talking about the same sun gods. In the book, The Hindu Pantheon by Sir Edward Moore. It's a very big, old book, which I have a copy. It's called The Hindu Pantheon by Sir Edward Moore. And in here we have pictures of the crucified Krishna. It says crucified Krishna, crucified in space with the solar radiance above him. Krishna, which was the Christ of ancient India. There is Krishna, crucified in space. We're talking about Krishna, of the Hindu god who died and was crucified. Looks kind of like Jesus. It's because it's one and the same. Krishna or Christ. Same thing. It's the sun. Sun worship. Next, Isus or Jesus of the ancient Celtic Druids. This is Jesus of the Celtic Druidic peoples. And incidentally, the Celtic Druidic peoples had Jesus dying on a cross. Not Jesus, Jesus. The man who dies on the cross. And you will see the round circle in yellow. That's the sun dying on the cross. A few more. Here's Bacchus Dionysus, the god of wine. He's dying on the cross. Here's another Greek god who died on a cross. Aztecs, Mayas, and the Incas also had gods. This particular one dies on the cross. As I said, this is a pre-Christian sun god in Eastern Europe, pre-Christian sun gods. Here's another pre-Christian god dying on a cross. And while we're on the subject of crosses, today wearing crosses as jewelry. You see so many people today wearing crosses and earrings, and jewelry and earrings, crosses around the neck. We think this is very holy and very righteous. Well, in point of fact, actually, there's nothing holy about cross earrings or bracelets or anything else. Because crosses as earrings and necklaces were worn by pagans 1,000 years before Christianity ever happened. 1,000 years before Christianity, the Egyptians worshipped and used the cross. Here's the old ancient pagan cults from thousands of years before Christianity, and these ancient Assyrian pagan gods were wearing crosses around their neck. This is a very ancient idea of wearing a cross around your neck. Pagans wore crosses around their neck. Pagans in the ancient world wore cross earrings. Pagan priests had their garbs and their clothing with crosses. This is 1,500 years before the Christian era. And you will see they're wearing crosses around their neck. And the priest is wearing crosses on his garb. Nothing holy about this. Ancient sun worship. Well, now let's go back to the Christian sun worship, but let's start with the Catholic Church first. The single most important symbol in the ancient Roman sun cult, known today as the Roman Catholic Church, is the symbol of the body of Jesus Christ. That symbol is called a monstance. This is very important, so let's go back over that. The single most important symbol in the ancient Roman sun cult, known today as the Roman Catholic Church in Rome, is the symbol of the body of Jesus Christ. The symbol of the body of Jesus Christ in Rome today is called the monstrance. A monstrance is the symbol of the sun. It's called a monstrance. It symbolizes the presence of God. Jesus. Jesus is the Son. Jesus is God with us. A monstrance. So, the monstrance symbolizes the presence of Jesus, and of course Jesus is sun worship. So therefore it's only right that the monstrance would be a glorious sun. But the Pope, and the Vatican, and the whole Christian world is leading multiple millions, if not billions of people, and their sun worship. Worship of the sun. On the altars of Christianity, the Pope. Here's this goofy old man who has two monstrance. Not happy with being a pagan with one, he's got to have two. So, this is nothing more than the old pagan Roman sun worship. Everywhere you see the Catholic Church, you'll see even Protestant churches have the sun. The sun monstrance represents the presence of Jesus, God's Son. On the altars, everywhere you look, always they're bowing down to the sun. This is just a few of the thousands of sun pictures of a monstrance or sun worship. The priest leading the people to bow down to the sun. Everywhere you look, people around the world are being led into the most ancient pagan worship the world has ever known. Sun worship. Christians will tell you that they have Jesus in their heart. How many times have we heard people say that you should let Jesus come into your heart? Your heart is in the area called solar plexus. That's why have you asked Jesus into your heart? Or put Jesus into your heart. Keep Jesus in your heart. And so we hear Christians talking about how they have, after they were confirmed and they came to know Jesus, they have Jesus in their heart. The idea is to keep Jesus in your heart. What does this mean? Well, first of all, this part where your heart is in something called the solar plexus. The general area is called the solar plexus. That's where the heart is. So that's why many of the saints will always have the sun in the solar plexus of the area where your heart is. So you have Jesus or the sun in your heart. Holding the sun, Jesus with the sun. So remember, the ancient petroglyph sun that we talked about on the first video, the petroglyph sun, one of the oldest symbols of the sun in this world, the Holy Communion that Catholics take is the old petroglyph sun symbol. Well, the one thing we all know that the sun does each morning is it rises. Therefore, the sun is our risen Savior. And some of the most clever pictures people have done showing a clever use of the sun in photography. And here's the priest raising the host, showing the sun and its rising. Here's the Pope showing the sun that's rising. The risen sun. 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 Always the idea is the sun is rising. And that's why it's your Savior, because it is rising. If it doesn't rise, we're dead. The Pope appears to be looking to see if you've caught on to what he's doing. Raising the host, the sun. Okay, so we have more of the same. You know, there are just hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures of the old ancient petroglyph sun cross everywhere in Christianity. Always the same, the sun, the risen sun. Here's a clever picture of someone holding the sun, just like Jesus holding the sun. Holding the sun. This ancient sun worship has been going on for thousands of years. It's still being perpetrated today, and millions of people still continue to follow Christian sun worship, never realizing that the church is nothing more than the holders of the ancient pagan sun worship. And this is why today, all over the world, Christians are praying to God for protection, for security, to protect them, for guidance, etc. And the more Christians pray to their God, the worse the world becomes. The more violent it becomes, the more wars, drugs and killings, murder, corruption. The more the Christians pray to their sun god, the worse things get. Which proves that they're praying to the wrong God. Now let's look at some of the symbolism here. Here's a human picking up the sun. This one is giving his friend the sun, to eat. Here's the sun on his tongue. That's the same thing you get when you're going to communion. Whole family should receive Jesus in the Holy Communion every Sunday. The idea is the sun on your tongue. So the idea, of course, is to eat the sun god's body. This is called communion, where you actually eat the sun. And for those that can't see very well, they make a pizza-sized sun for those who can't see very good. So there's a bigger sun for the old folks who can't see very well. They make a pizza-sized sun. Now, one last point. God's Son always dies on a cross. Here we have Jesus, God's Son, who dies on the cross, and you'll see the sun around his head. The sun God who dies on the cross. Always the sun is on the cross. Everywhere you look on the cross, you will always see the sun. The sun dies on the cross. This is why if you drive by churches, any church you drive by to see a cross on the church, you will always see a sun. The sun and the cross, a megalithic culture of early Christianity in Ireland. The cross is the cross between the fall and spring, winter and summer. On the circle, you draw a straight line across from fall to spring, and then from winter to summer, and it's a cross, and the sun is in the middle. So the sun in the middle on the cross. So the sun dies on the cross between summer, winter, spring, and autumn. That's why the 12 apostles at the Last Supper, you will see, are divided into groups of 3. 3 for spring, 3 for summer, 3 for autumn, 3 for winter. and the sun in the middle. That's why you have the four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Spring, summer, autumn, winter. In the modern day Roman solar or sun cult we call Christianity, you will always see the sun hanging on a cross. On the left you will see the sun, in the middle you'll see the cross, and on the right you'll see the sun on the cross. Get it? Sun, the cross, the sun dies on the cross. The old Coptic symbol for the cross is the sun on the cross. So you see this everywhere, the idea of the sun dying on the cross. Always with the cross, there's always a sun in the middle. Always. Virtually never do you see these are in churches. Sun on the cross. That's why on all churches, as I said, you will always see a circle on the cross. It's the sun on the cross of the zodiac, northeast, west, and south. Winter, summer, autumn, spring. Everywhere you see the cross, you'll see the sun. On the altars, everywhere. Well, the bottom line, of course, after everything is said and done, all you're seeing in Christianity is the old, ancient, most ancient, prehistoric ancient sun worship. That's why Jesus is called God's Son, the light of the world. Sun cross. So, most people have no idea in the world of what they're looking at and what they're doing and what they're worshiping, because church has become a social institution. It's a social arrangement, a fraternal order, never realizing for a moment He is risen. Well, of course, that's what the sun does every morning. It rises. What is that, the sun on the cross? So I think I've made my point. Everywhere you look, you will always see the Son who dies on the cross. On His shoulder you will see the Son behind the cross. Children are taught to pray to God's Son who's on the cross. Even the Nazis have a sun on the cross. The swastika is the sun. The Nazis had crosses with suns. Sun crosses. Adolf Hitler had in his yard had a sunflower on a cross. This is in Hitler's yard. He had a sunflower on his cross. So, therefore, when the sun goes south, December 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, it's in the furthest point in the southern sky. The sun reaches the lowest point in the southern sky in the southern hemisphere. There is a constellation of stars called the Southern Cross. So, I think by now you get the point that the Christian Son, S-U-N, of God,